You've probably read or seen something about the recent story of Jessica Krug. She's a tenured associate professor of history at George Washington University, and she recently came out in a piece that she wrote. She's a white woman admitting that she's been posing as a black woman for quite some time. We don't know exactly how long. She teaches African history, U.S. history, the history of the African diaspora, and identifies as part Latina, Caribbean, black. But the reality is that she's a white woman from Kansas City, Missouri. The latest in the story is that George Washington University is thinking about replacing her. And we'll see if that happens, because it's tough to get rid of tenured professors. But of all the stories I've been reading from both the left and the right, they don't seem to address certain questions. Now, some of these questions aren't being addressed because maybe they just don't know yet. But others, I'm pretty sure, are addressed because they don't want to address them, because she upsets the narrative in many ways. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. The first question they don't want to talk about is, why can't she identify as black? You look around the country today, we see people identifying as all sorts of things. We see people identify as animals. We see perfectly capable people identifying as handicapped. We see men identifying as women. We see women identifying as men. We're told that despite DNA, despite biology, there are maybe as many as 200 different genders. If we accept all that, why can't we accept the fact that Jessica Krug wants to identify as black? What's to prevent her from doing that? Her DNA? That doesn't prevent a man from identifying as a woman. Why should it prevent her, if she so chooses, to identify as black? Why should she be attacked from the left? Why should she be lampooned from the right? Why should George Washington University be considering the possibility of removing her from her tenured position as associate professor? Why? The next question I want to bring up is a tough one for George Washington University. Why do they want to remove her? And how did she get where she is? If she's a tenured associate professor, what does that mean? That means she applied for the position years ago. It was competitive. It was a national search. She was brought to campus for an interview, and after that interview, she was hired as the best candidate. Subsequently, as an assistant professor, she did the things that she was asked to do. She published. She taught, at least to some level of competence, and she provided service to the department, her college, and the university. She must have done those things, or she wouldn't have been hired, and she wouldn't have been tenured and promoted to associate professor. She has written at least one book I know of, and I've read somewhere else she's published too. So why would they want to remove her? Given that we know, because of her rank and her status as a tenured professor, that she must have accomplished all those goals that were set for her by the university, the college, and the department, are we to assume that if we're going to get rid of her, it's because of her color? Are we to assume that she maybe was only hired because she was black? Are we to assume that if she had been a white woman, a self-professed white woman, and identified as a white woman, she never would have been hired in the first place? And the only reason she has the job is because she's black? Are we to assume she would not have been tenured and promoted to associate professor if she had been white and not been black? If those statements aren't true, if she would have been hired no matter what color she was, then why is she going to be replaced now? Why is she in trouble? Simply for identifying as black. That's what I mean. Her case is about a lot more than just posing as an African American. It undercuts the narrative. It undercuts the narrative of diversity, and it undercuts, most importantly, the narrative of white privilege. Because if she's being removed because she's white, and we know she wouldn't be removed if she was black, then looks almost as if instead of white privilege, what we have is black privilege. Let's reverse the colors. Let's reverse the roles. Let's assume for the sake of argument that Jessica Krug had been born black, but she looked kind of white. So at some point in her life, she started passing herself off as white. And we know this has happened in the past with any number of people. If she had applied to GW, gotten the position, been promoted and everything else, and they suddenly found out now that this woman, this tenured associate professor, is actually an African-American woman and not a white woman, would she be in trouble? Would they be talking about replacing her if they found out that their white professor was actually black? Or would they be promoting her? I mean, think about that for a second. Would they be threatening to replace this woman? Would she be being attacked from the left if she was an African-American woman who had posed as a white woman and made her way to this point in academia as a tenured associate professor, which is about as far as most academics ever get? Would she be in trouble? Would she be being attacked from the right and from the left? Or would she be praised as a symbol of racism in this country, that she had to pose as white so she could take advantage of white privilege and get where she was headed? We know what the answer to these questions would be. And they're the exact opposite of what we're seeing because she's a white woman posing as a black woman. So if you flip the narrative then, what you have is the fact that Jessica Krug is the poster child for black privilege, at least in academia. And we'll talk about the rest of society. Let me give you an example, a personal example. I just retired as an academic. I had a fairly successful career. I went from assistant professor to a tenured full professor in 8 years. I published 10 books, 20 articles, brought in more than $600,000 in grant money. I chaired 3 academic departments: geography, 2 years, history, 8 years, English, 2 years, 12 years in total. That's pretty good for an academic career. 10 books. The average social scientist publishes less than 2 in their lives. I published 10, and I have 2 more that are sitting in the hopper needing to be finished. I may publish them before I die. But where did I end up? A 5th-tier state school. If I had been an African-American male with 10 books, 20 articles, over $500,000 in grants, and had spent 12 years chairing 3 academic departments, you think I would have ended up at a 5th-tier school? I don't think so. I know people with far worse records that are far better schools than I'm at, but they're African Americans. I do not think I would be finishing my career as I did where I was if I wasn't white. I've long believed that there is black privilege, not white privilege, when it comes to university life. I've seen it in hiring decisions. I know that if there are 2 applicants, one's white, one's black, the black person's going to get hired. Or the other minority. If it's a man and a woman, the woman will get hired. That's the way it works. Even if it's not quite close, that's still the way it works. We don't always hire the best candidate. If we bring 3 people to campus, one of them has to be a minority. One of them must be a woman. We can't just bring 3 white guys to campus for an interview, or you'll get in trouble. I don't think white privilege works in academia. Maybe it works in society as a whole, but certainly not, from what I've seen, not in academia. And I think this example of Jessica Krug proves it. Why did she pose as an African American? We don't know how long she's been doing it. Did she get into college that way? Did she get special scholarships Did she get assistance? Did it help her get her job? I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't white people who teach African history or Black history in American universities. I know there are. But you know damn well, if you have two candidates, one's white, one's Black, for an African American history position, there's got to be something really setting the one apart over the other, especially at the assistant professor level, to hire the white person over the Black person. That's just not the way it works. And she's giving us a window into this system of how it works. So what do we know? Well, there's still a lot we don't know. We don't know how long she's been doing this. We don't know what assistance she got along the way. We don't know what advantages she garnered. We know she did publish a book with a very good press, Duke University Press. Would that book have been published if she was white? Probably. The reviewers gave it good reviews. There's nothing obvious from her name that would make the reviewers think that she wasn't white. If you go by Rate My Professor, she's not been a very good teacher. Her scores are about 2.5 on a 1 to 5 scale. Less than 40% of the students who take her class said they would never take one again with her. So she's not a stellar teacher. But to be frank, there are plenty of people, and I was a department chair for 12 years, who aren't stellar teachers, who are tenured academics, even up to the rank of full professor. So there's nothing there that would make me think she wouldn't have been promoted, unless she was Black. But on the other side, I don't know, and we don't know. And as I said before, how early did she start this in her professional career? Did she use it to get into college? Did she use it to get special scholarships? We don't know. And what harm was there? I mean, did she take a scholarship from a student who's actually Black? Did she take her faculty position from another applicant who was actually Black? We don't know these things. But we do know two things. That the reaction of the left in this case is totally inconsistent with how they respond to cases of gender identity. You can identify as a woman if you're a man if you're a woman. Why can't you identify as Black if you're white, or white if you're Black? Why couldn't I choose to identify as a Korean? These are real questions, and it undermines the narrative that they're pushing, that these things are just social constructs. They're not, and they know it. And the other thing we know is that at least on college campuses and academia, Black privilege is more powerful than white privilege. If it wasn't, she wouldn't be in trouble. As I said, if you reverse the roles, if she was an African-American woman posing as a white person, there'd be no problem. She'd probably be praised. But the roles are reversed. And instead, they're thinking of getting rid of her. Despite the fact that she's jumped through all the hurdles that you have to go through to make it to associate professor, tenured associate professor. And they're not simple ones to get through. And the fact that they want to replace her suggests that one of the reasons she was able to get through those hurdles was because they thought she was Black. There's no other way around it. The very evidence coming from her case undercuts the narrative of white privilege, at least in academia. It's that simple. And that's why they hate her. That's why they're attacking her. That's why they want to get rid of her, because she's an embarrassment, because she undermines the narrative. In many ways, she's destroying the narrative. So what do you think? Let me know in a comment. Please hit the thumbs up button if you like the video. Share it with your friends. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification button so you know when I post new videos. And until the next time, to use some of that Korean identity that I can choose to adopt if I prefer to, they like to say fighting. So as we face this resistance from the left that's been going on now for almost 4 years, what we need to do is to do the same thing. We need to keep